Welcome to the Seeds of Wisdom series, brought to you by From a Loving Place with author Rachel Wolf. If you like deep, meaningful conversations, this is your place. So settle in and enjoy today's guest. Disclaimer: The Seeds of Wisdom digs into some deep subject matter. In order to plant a seed, we have to dig in the dirt. That's how we grow. If any of the subject matter feels like too much, it is important to seek your own mental health support. I did, and it's why I'm able to be here doing this today. Hello and welcome to Seeds of Wisdom. Today is episode 32, and I am so excited. Today's seed is throwing love at challenges with my very special guest, Susan Powers. And I just finished reading her book, Walking on Air. Look at how much this is marked. I mean, it's full. So just trust that this is going to be an amazing conversation. With that, Susan, will you please introduce yourself?
Okay. Well, I'm Susan Powers, and I work as a psychotherapist, and I have done that for over 40 years. And as a teenager, I always wanted to write books. And I was an English major, and then I decided I didn't have enough to write about as a teenager. And so I went into psychology. And now, having been in psychology for a very long time, in my, I guess, late 60s, early 70s, I started writing books. And I've just finished my second book, which is Walking on Air. The first book was called Ruthless Grieving. And I wrote it out of a time of loss and what I learned about grief from my own grief. And right now I'm writing a third book called The Power of Aging, Becoming an Elder. And I actually now have learned that I write to learn things. And I've learned a lot in the first two books that I wrote, and I kind of want to learn more about aging. And so I'm writing a book about that now.
Oh, I love how that works. And in this book, you actually have a section on throwing love at aging.
Uh-huh, that's right. I do.
Yeah. So I love that. So let's start with, what does throwing love at challenges mean to you?
Okay. Well, my writing started with writing about grief. And one of the things I learned in writing about grief is that grief needs expression. And um, what a summary of the that first book could be that grief is love. And I from writing many sections in Walking on Air about throwing love at this, throwing love at that, that I thought I could also rename the first book Throwing Love at Grief, because we can get very lost in the pain, and grief is love, and it's about love. And the last chapter of this book, Walking on Air, is called Full Spectrum Living. And what I've learned is that, and I heard it said at a memorial service within the last several years, someone said, if we just focus on the sadness and pain of loss, we can get depressed and morose. And if we just focus on the joy and the love, and it's okay, we can become glib and superficial. And so, what I'm recommending for everything is full spectrum, not to deny the pain, and to include the love, and to notice what love does for the challenges of life. And that started for me when I lost my second husband in 2001. And I realized that I didn't want to live. And I found that I really understood survivor guilt from the inside. And I found that I needed to give myself on a daily basis permission to be alive. And that's where my grief started. Okay, I'll do this day. even I don't want to do this day, but I will do this day. And it developed into a very strong practice of living in the day. And I used to say we're born in the morning and we die at night. And now I've changed that into every day is a lifetime. And it really started with permission to be alive, even though my husband had died. And it turned into really a great love of being alive, of being myself, of love for myself, and of honoring the love that I had for my husband, Bob.
And
And
I
go
oh,
ahead.
I
Yeah.
love that you talk about this piece, because in your book you talk about the morning decision, and I felt so impacted by that. I liked the way it was presented. It's as the morning decision. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I'd love to. The morning decision, it started with permission to be alive when I was grieving. And and as I practiced the morning decision, it became very enriched and alive, and very much a decision to open the heart in the morning. And that's what throw love at it. It's sort of like throw love at the day.
Mhm.
And a decision. I write about the evolution of my morning decision from permission to be alive today. I'm deciding to give myself permission to be alive today, and nobody else can give me that permission. I'm the only one who can give myself that permission. And it evolves and it changes. And I talk about prayer and affirmations, that they need to be in our own words. Like my prayers need to be in my own words that have meaning for me. And I write a list of the evolution of my morning decision into I'm deciding to do this day with an open heart.
Yes.
And that's throwing love at the day. It's throwing love at my life. It's throwing love at myself. There's a chapter in the book, Throwing Love at Myself, because we can't really throw love at anything else unless we're throwing love at ourselves on a daily basis. Like I'm choosing to love myself today. One of my versions of the morning decision is I'm deciding to do this day with care. And
Hmm.
that is with my own care, with care for myself, with receiving care. And sometimes I just use care instead of love. It just has to have meaning for me personally. And care is a wonderful word that I love the word care. So,
Well, and I love in your book because I feel like so many times when we're reading something from somebody that we see as wise, or we see as educated, or we see as the professional, we don't give ourselves permission to do it our way.
yes,
And
sure.
I love that throughout the book, you remind people to do it your way.
Yes,
This is how I do it, but you have to figure out how to do it your way. And
yes, that's so important.
yeah, and that's kind of the seeds of wisdom. Why I do it this way is because it's a seed. We are presenting a seed. You can choose to plant it in your garden. You can choose to not plant it in your garden. You can plant it wherever you want in your garden.
It's
That's
your
your
garden,
choice.
your garden.
Yes, but that's your garden. We can't plant the seed for you.
Yes,
It's
yes,
not planted for you. All we can do is offer it.
yes,
And for me, that was that understanding in my life of it's my garden of my soul, and
yeah,
I choose to plant and weed out what doesn't work in my life. And I love how you talk about it as we shift, some of these practices will shift, some of these things we say will shift, some of it changes, and it's that permission from somebody we trust that says it's okay to change. It's
mhm.
okay to change it. And I love that about your work, is you're not saying I know everything.
That's right. I know that. I know that I don't know. That's the wisdom,
Yes, exactly. And I
or that there's more to learn. Yeah.
yes, and that things can shift, and our ideas can shift, and it's okay to shift and
Mhm.
change.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about the difference about throwing love at challenges versus throwing positivity at challenges, because I think that's something that I know I have addressed with what my page is called From a Loving Place, is people misconstruing that as meaning positivity, and it doesn't. So, can you talk a little bit about the difference of that?
Sure. I think of well, just what I said before about if I choose to only live in positivity, then I can become glib and superficial because the pain of life, the negativity in life, the challenges of life are part of life. And there's a little vignette that I wrote about that I think is an example of this. That I had a friend who always used to greet me with, and I think a lot of people do this. I've noticed quite a few people doing this. Hi, is everything good? And I get very turned off to that because it's so unrealistic. It's kind of glib, and it's just not real. And the last chapter of Walking on Air is about full spectrum living, that we include all the feelings. And one of the affirmations that I write about, it comes from the Unity group, and it's all is well. And I wrote about, and I taught my friend to, about like the difference of everything's good and all is well. All is well like has depth. All of well is inclusive. I'm allowing everything to be the way it is, which is one of my morning decisions, giving everything permission to be the way it is. And that's inclusive. All is well. And I use that a lot for myself. All is well. And it's completely different from everything's good in my experience.
Well, and that's for me too, because it is a trigger thing for me. If I am expressing my feelings and someone says, "Well, what good happened today?" or what's good? And if it's while I'm expressing my feelings, I feel dismissed.
Yes. And why are you being so negative?
Yeah, exactly. And it's not about negativity. It's about getting the feelings out of me so they don't live inside of me.
That's
I
right.
don't, if I suppress them, I know that that does damage to me in the way I'm living.
Uh-huh.
So my process is to see them, to recognize them, and then to let them go as they are meant to go, not force them to go. And I like how you say in the book, I think you say forced optimism, right?
Yes.
It's
Yes.
not to force optimism. That's not healthy.
Yes. No, and it's very pervasive too. And it can be sort of mixed in with spirituality, like, oh, you're not being spiritual enough. And it's a false description of spirituality in my experience. And one of the things that I really learned in writing that first book about grief is that grief needs expression. And it's such a wonderful thing to know, and I'm a writer, so I think of verbal expression, but as I was writing the book, I realized that, there are so many other ways to express love in gesture and in visual and art, that we can express our heart in so many different ways that and we get to pick the modality that I use words because I'm a writer and a speaker. But
Well,
it's good to know that there are all sorts of forms of loving expression. Yeah.
yes. Well, and one of that, and I definitely saw that as is throwing love at the day, is you have a spin on a gratitude list for the end of the day with 5 satisfying things that happened to me today or happened today. And I loved that because it's not about denying anything else that happened. It's about just recognizing what was satisfying in this day.
Yes, and it's based on experience, not on something intellectual or theoretical. Like, I'm grateful that I have legs,
Yeah.
or I'm grateful I can see. It's like I'm grateful for that flower that I saw today.
Yes. I love that idea of that. And when you're, because it's like I've been raised around gratitude lists my whole life and I've written them and I love them. But sometimes when I don't feel like doing them, I feel like this is a much better option because if I'm not in that energy of gratitude, for me, it would be healthier to focus on what was satisfying, just noticing the satisfying things of the day.
Yes.
I
I heard
love that.
someone share the other day when I was with a group of people. He was saying, I'm learning to honor my gratitude about what I really feel grateful for,
Mhm.
because the gratitude list idea can even become glib.
Yes.
And so he said, I cleaned my apartment yesterday and I woke up this morning in a clean apartment. Like just something, like really concrete, detailed experience.
Well, and I've noticed for me, if I make it a chore, if I make it something I have to do, it
Oh,
it
yeah.
doesn't have the same effect because I am doing it from a place of resentment. I'm doing it from a place of resistance.
It's the
I'm
difference of
not
the
actually
outside and the inside.
exactly.
You need to do it internally. Well, one thing I wanted to mention, because I keep thinking of it, is when we talk about throwing love at parts of life and challenges. One of the important chapters in the throwing love at it section is throwing love at alienation. People we don't like. And
Mhm.
there's a thing in spiritual philosophy: pray for people you don't like, and that always annoyed me. um, but there's really something to it. And what it is I don't have to be in someone's presence if I don't like them. And one of the things I use also to describe that I don't like someone is I don't relate to them. And so that already puts them a little at a distance, but it's not a judgment. And so I don't relate to them, or I don't like something they've done or something that they do, but I don't relate to them, and I can wish them well from afar. And that's a way to throw love at situations that are challenging or difficult. I don't have to call them up. I don't have to send them nice notes.
Or try to change them. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, just wish them well from afar. And that's a good example, I think, of throwing love at a challenge.
Oh, definitely. And
And
and yeah, and just so people know, because we don't have time to talk about each and every one, but there in your book, you talk about throwing love at addiction, throwing love, at different things like these cancer, hard lessons, hard
Mhm.
um things that are feel like challenges. So it really does help see and just give an opportunity to look at things differently.
Definitely. And I was going to write about sort of inclusive things like what are people's challenges of life and what are the things that are the most challenging. And I decided that I wasn't going to be inclusive and include everything I could think of that are a challenge. I wrote about my challenges.
Yeah.
Addiction runs in my family, so I wrote about throwing love at addiction. My father died of Alzheimer's, so I wrote about illness, and especially the illness of throwing love at Alzheimer's. And I turned 80 this summer, and so I wrote about throwing love at aging, the challenges of aging, and the losses that are involved in aging, but the pluses that are involved in aging too, the wisdom that comes, and the positive parts of wisdom that comes with age. So it's kind of reframing things in checking in with the heart and reframing challenges, uh, like I say, with an open heart.
Yeah. I love that. The Is there anything you'd like to say to the listeners who are going to stop here, who are either listening on the podcast or on Facebook before we continue on to our YouTube segment?
Sure. Well, we were talking about wisdom and teachers, and there's a quote that write throughout the book. It's mentioned about four different times in different ways, and it's a quote by Rumi. Um, Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. And I was telling a friend about this quote and how much I love it. I'll meet you at a field where there's no idea of wrongdoing or right doing, which really is where there is no judgment. And she said to me, "Well, you know where that field is." And I said, "Well, where do you mean?" And I really wasn't thinking of this, but she said, "That field is in the heart. In the heart, there's no judgment." And so if I go into my heart and I find a freedom from judgment of any kind, to me, that's what throwing love at it means.
Mm. I absolutely love that because that makes it easy to see. It
Yes.
makes it easy to see it.
The other thing I would say, just to add, is that with prayers, and I grew up in a very religious household, and I had trouble with the word God for a long time, and that I often use the word love for the word God. Like love helps me, love guides me, and somehow that gives it meaning.
Yes,
So
and I found that because if we have any kind of resentment or anger towards a spiritual practice, a religion, or anything like that, when we say prayers but yet have that resentment, we're actually holding the energy of the resentment, not the prayer.
yes, that's true. Yeah, I agree.
So
Yeah.
I find that sometimes, like, I'll do the same thing. I'll say love universe because that's that all inclusiveness of it all. Um,
Yes.
the
Mhm.
connection of it all, the oneness of it all, the and all of that, where that feels. And now I can, I can say God without resentment, but there was a long time I could not, you know.
Yes, the thing
And
that
so
helped me with yeah.
yeah, so it really does, like you said, it's about finding what works for you when it works for you.
Yes. Yes.
Your words matter.
Mhm. I agree. The thing that helped me most recently about using the word God was someone said that they use the word God as a placeholder for all their spiritual experiences. And it's like, oh, sure, I could say God.
Yes. Yes. So, because that I feel like is such an important piece that I see people struggle with. So I'm glad it got brought up.
And one of the ways that I describe my book is a secular spirituality.
Hmm.
It's not a religious thing,
Yeah.
but it's practical spirituality or secular. Yeah.
Well, for anybody who is ending here, know that if you're listening, you're meant to be here. You can go to the YouTube for the extended, which is will be in all of the links. So we'll hope to see you there. But I, as I we go on, I would like to talk about the other plans because I thought this was such a brilliant way of talking about this. So I'm going to let you talk about what the other plans mean.
Okay. Well, the whole first section of the book is about the morning decision, living in the day, making a decision in the morning to set a tone for the day, opening the heart, all the things that we do, having a morning ritual, your own. Uh, but what I referenced in other plans is that in my second marriage, my husband Bob, he was in a very difficult work situation, working with special needs kids, and he dreaded going to work every day. And so that thing about have a good day, I would add with him unless you have other plans. And he used to get so mad at me, and it's not a nice thing to say really, but it's descriptive, because just as we make a decision to open the heart in the morning, we can also make a decision that this day is going to be horrible, and those are the other plans, all every so many different versions of the other plans that we make, which is like just a negative painful decision. I think I talk quite a bit in the book about dread.
Hmm.
It's like, oh, I dread this day. It's going to be awful. And there's so many different things that we can dread. and it doesn't help anything, like throw love at it, like it could be okay, and but we have to be aware of that tendency to like throw dread at it. Actually, I just made that up right now, but yeah. So let's not throw dread at it, and be aware of what the dread is. You know, I'm sure I'm going to have a terrible time with that friend of mine I'm having lunch with because I really don't like what she did to me last week,
Hmm.
or something like that. It's like a decision to not have a good time, to not connect, to not be real, all the different things. And so, yeah, other plans can be very pervasive, actually. And it can be also kind of connected to like depression. And that's also an important thing to be aware of. Like, what is your depression saying to you today? And is there any way that it might be better than that, or something good might happen?
Yeah. Well, and because yeah, we were talking about the ruminating stories. So those stories of rumination come from that fear, the dread, the separation, the lack, whatever it is. It
Mm.
it it is that decision to go, okay, that's throwing those things at it. What would it look like even to throw
Mhm.
love at it? Just
Yes, yeah,
even observing the awareness of what it would look like.
that's right. As a possibility.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
And I've heard people say never eliminate the possibility of a positive outcome. That's kind of throwing love at it.
Mhm. Because yeah, it can go either way. And you also told a story that I loved in the book about one of your friends who has these signs up in her, like in her bed,
Yeah.
next to her bed and in the bathroom. If you talk
Uh-huh.
about those, I thought those were great too.
Sure. Well, this is part of sort of the other plans.
Yeah.
Uh, or we always have, that there's a thing about not knowing. There's a lot of wisdom in that I don't know. And I even have a little physical exercise in the book about shrugging.
Mhm.
It's like, I don't know. And it's very powerful to not know and to allow ourselves to not know. But it's like, I know what I'm doing at 5 o'clock, and I know where I'm going, and I know I have a 5 year plan, and I know. And the truth is, we don't know. And that's why I called it Embracing Uncertainty. That's the subtitle of the book, Embracing Uncertainty. And so this woman that I know embraces uncertainty by putting a sign by her bed, and when she wakes up in the morning, the little note by her bed says, "It's not going to be like that." And then she has a second sign that she puts up in her bathroom when she gets to the mirror in her bathroom, and it says, "And it's not going to be like that either."
And I love that because it reminds me of like when you're having struggles with somebody and you have that conversation with them in your head over and over and over and in all these different ways, and you get your attitude going in it.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I was like, I just saw that note would be perfect. Of nope, it's not going to be like that.
I know it's going to be. And things happen like that all the
Yeah.
time. I mean, being healthy, I think, to me, is also being spontaneous. And something else happening, or noticing something and changing your idea of how you're going to do something. And spontaneity is very healthy.
Yes. And that's something I work on because that and I'm very grateful. And you talk about this in the book, is about having a partner that's different from you, because I struggle with that I can be rigid sometimes with the plan, with the schedule, with all of this, and he's very flexible.
Mhm.
And so it helps me to go, okay, just because it's not the way I plan doesn't mean I'm not safe.
Mm. Mhm. That's true. Safety is so much like, I know, I have to know, I better know. Yeah.
Hmm.
I've used an example also. I don't think it's in the book, but I remember when I was attracted to someone, talking to someone about, like, well, I don't know when I should call them. I think I should call them next week. I'll wait because I just talked to them. Or maybe I should do it right now. And then the person said to me, and it was just like a moment that where you get an awareness. She said, or maybe you won't call them at all. It was like a light bulb went off, like, no, I'm going to do it this or this time. I mean, that's the only possibility, and then just to put in another possibility that was at the time kind of unthinkable, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I love too, you bring up Deepak Chopra, and there's a traffic example. And
Yeah.
that was like an aha moment to me when you brought it up. So
Yeah.
can you explain that? Because I thought that was like, that's one
Hmm.
of my areas of weakness.
That's
It's
true. And all of us have it too. Well, Chopra talks about possibilities, and that's kind of what we're talking about, possibilities
traffic.
and opening up to different possibilities. And he even sort of has meditations that are just about possibilities, not attaching to any particular possibility, but allowing for possibility. And so he uses the example of traffic, and he says, if you're, oh, I know about possibility, because the other side of possibility is resistance. Well, that'll never happen, or this is not going to happen, or and I also use the attitude of, this should not be happening to me. And I think that's a pretty pervasive attitude. Sometimes I could have that early on, I could have that about my whole life, this
Mhm.
shouldn't be happening, and this shouldn't be happening, and they shouldn't be doing that, and this people should, that this should, and I use it with my hands on my hips. This should not be happening to me. Uh, and so Chopra uses the example of traffic. And he says, if you're resisting the traffic, for example, you're resisting the forces of the entire universe. And that was a wake up moment for me. And, since then I've really expanded it. Like, everything is traffic,
Yeah.
you know, and okay, this is happening. This is what's happening right now. It really has helped me in traffic a lot. It goes a certain level, and then if the traffic gets too bad for too long, I lose it anyway. But generally, I have a lot more tolerance of traffic. It's sort of like everything, like, okay, this is happening. It's all right. It's all right. And then, it can reach a point where it's like, no, it's not all right.
Yeah. Well, and we
That's
get to
the
practice a lot because I know we both live in high tourist areas for
right. Yes,
certain seasons. We live in very high tourist areas. So it's
that's right. Traffic happens.
adjusting. Yes.
Traffic happens.
Yes. And I love that. And because we're in it right now. We're in our season. So
Ah,
that like
right.
came at perfect timing for me.
And I live at the beach I live in the Hamptons, so we get that in the summer. Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
And one of the ways I throw love at traffic is, and about feeling invaded by, when people come in certain seasons, and is that I live in one of the most beautiful places in the world, and everyone wants to be here. So I allow that, yeah, a lot of people are here right now, and there's a lot of traffic because I'm so lucky to live in such a beautiful place. That's a good example of throwing love at a challenge.
Yes. And I just recently saw one of my friends posted on their Facebook, I love living in a place that people come to vacation. And it's like, that's so true.
Hmm.
Living in these places that people go for our environment, for our
Yeah, because
nature,
it's
for
so
our
good.
the beauty.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it really is a gift to be able to live here
Hmm.
in
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
I love all these different examples. And, you know, I feel like the throwing love at the challenges is, for me, it's an essential piece. Because if I can't throw love at it, I- I'm miserable,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know, and then I can't show up for the people I love
Hmm.
when
Yeah.
I'm so drowned by uh,
Hmm.
all the outer circumstances.
Yes. And resisting what's going on, whatever it is.
Hmm. Well, and I love that you talk a lot about grief because I feel like grief is one of those things, and you talk about this in your book, even that, you know, so many people feel like they're grieving wrong.
Yes. Hmm.
And that's painful in itself to feel like you're not grieving right.
Mm-hmm.
And then it adds that layer of shame to grief, which is a dangerous combination.
Absolutely. Stephen Levine said that because he had studied so many people grieving. And he said one of the most common features of people grieving is they think they're doing it wrong because we don't have a good blueprint for it. And the truth is, like you said before, I think that one of my messages is you do it your way. Trust your intuition, trust what you need. And ruthless, I called it ruthless grieving because you have to go against convention a lot of the time. It's like you can't do that. You're this, and it's like yes, I can. I need the freedom to go through something in my own intuitive way.
Well, and I found that even with experiencing trauma, people will do that too, is treat people like they're doing that wrong.
Yes,
I've been told,
this is how you do it. This is how you.
yeah, I've
Yeah.
been told I couldn't say something because it might offend somebody who's experienced this. It's like, but I experienced this.
Mm, yeah,
This is,
exactly. Yeah.
this was my experience and what I did.
Yes, you can't deny what I'm saying because it's what I experienced. Yeah.
Yes. And so it was just another way that I had felt like, I'm like, but I liked that like you said, my intuition stepped in and said, that's not right.
Yes.
And
That's
gave myself permission to share my experience. I
which is
might not have shared it there, but I shared it on my page.
what I need now. Yeah.
Yeah.
True. Mm.
Because, I always try to see it as people are only seeing through their filters,
Mm-hmm.
their beliefs, their thoughts, their whatever.
Yes.
And I'm only seeing through mine. So for me, it's about me being open to see them and accept them for where they are, but allowing myself to say, that's not okay for me if it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't feel right.
Yes. And my concept of walking on air is about living life spontaneously without judgment and knowing that. So one of the things that I say is that if I'm in my head, I think I know where I'm going, I know what's happening, I understand everything, or if I don't, I'm trying to understand it. But if I'm living from the heart, it's a little more about operating in the dark.
Mhm.
It's like I don't know. I only know like the next right thing or the first sentence when I'm writing. It's not like I know everything. It's like my heart has a wisdom that goes beyond knowledge, and it's really intuition. And that's what I call walking on air,
God.
living from the heart.
And that a lot of people will see that as not full spectrum living, but it really is,
Yes, my
because
heart is
it's
full
not.
spectrum.
Yeah, a heart can feel pain.
Mm-hmm.
A
Mm-hmm.
heart can feel pain. A heart can feel all the feelings it's meant to feel. It just doesn't allow itself to be defined by a feeling that passes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I do love that you talk about that too, is the feelings about grief, especially, is understanding and accepting the different feelings that come with grief in different moments. In one moment you may be here, and the next moment you may be happy and joyous, and they're both okay.
Yes, and there's no right way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd like to just say a kind of a bit of a summary of the book, just because I think it would be informative around where my journey too.
Mhm.
But the first whole section, 30 something pages, is about the morning decision, living in the day, the different kinds of rituals you can establish. And I'm encouraging people to establish their own morning ritual, daily ritual. And to me that leads me into the heart, like opening the heart, my heart to the day. And so then the second section is all about throw love at it, and that was based on a conversation I had with someone, and he was saying that he had a mentor who whenever he would ask him about what he should do, he would say, well, throw love at it. And he really got annoyed with this man, saying like, you always say the same thing, throw love at it. And the guy said, well, try it, and he tried it with his teenage daughter. And it really helped him so much in his relationship with his teenage daughter, who was all about resistance. Throw love at it.
Mhm.
And so that's how I got the idea of throw love at grief, throw love at addiction, all those things. And that's how I have all those chapters about throwing love at the challenges of life. And really, my story of throwing, how I learned to throw love at the challenges in my life, or good examples that I saw of people throwing love at challenges. And then the last chapter in that section is called Learning to Receive the Love, because we can't just be throwing the love out. Some of us have real big challenges to let love in. And so that's what I ended that second section with, is how to catch. I said how to catch the love, learning to catch. And and then the last section of the book is about creating your life with an open heart. And it's about living a creative life. My first book was about grief, and I kind of knew I had to write a second book. And I was telling my son about it. And I was like, oh, I have to write another book about grief. And he said, Mom, no, not grief. You need to write about how you have established such a joyful life after traumatic loss. And so the third section is about creating a joyful life, and the tools for creating a joyful life that we've touched in the first two sections. But one of the chapters is accepting the uncertainty, accepting the mystery of life, which is also that part of not knowing. And then the last chapter is full spectrum living, like what we've talked about.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just thought it would be helpful to give a summary of the book.
So before we close, because I do love that you brought this up, let's talk about receiving love, because I think that is an important piece. And you, because you talk about codependency, you talk about all of that, and part of that is we're not accepting love even from ourselves.
That's it. Yeah, sure. Well, um, so many people, I think it's very pervasive. Like, I give love, I'm very loving, I love, 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 and no, I'll do that myself. It's like, really, that those little things where we don't accept help or support, or um I think I use the example of like, oh, I love that blouse. It's like, oh, I've had this forever, or something, or I got it in a thrift store, or like something that, like, you throw it back,
Mm-hmm.
not receiving it. Like, oh, thank you. Thanks. Just actually practicing receiving compliments or care, or, that kind of thing.
Well, and it reminded me of the time when I had gone into Al-Anon after being in a while being in a very toxic relationship, and I had lost myself in all these titles of thought I what I thought everybody thinks I should be,
Yes.
as a mom, as a wife, as this, as that. And I felt like this empty vessel. And part of that was my inability to receive love
Mm-hmm.
from myself, because I was constantly shaming myself. I was constantly just self-abusing with my words to myself.
Yeah.
And that whole receiving of love, starting with myself, was such a huge transformative piece for me, which Al-Anon helped me do.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That it was such a blessing to get to that point where I heard someone in Al-Anon say, which really stuck with me, I love you, but I love me more.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And I was like, I want to get there.
Yes. One of the
To be able
tools
to
that I,
have that healthy boundary of,
yeah,
I
I love
have to
me
do what's
more.
the highest good for me. And that will allow me to be the best I can for other people. But yeah, I have to go there first.
Yes. Yeah. One of the tools that I wrote about is writing a love letter to yourself.
Hmm.
Right. Just, like when you're feeling down or bad about yourself, like write a nice letter to yourself. You wouldn't do that to other people. So say something nice about yourself.
Well, and for in my book, one of the sections I have is having the love affair with myself and how that transformed the whole thing, because I heard a professor in college said you're as sick or as healthy as your partners.
Mm, mm.
And I
Uh-huh.
was like, that's
Right. Right.
okay. So then I was like, okay, so I that codependent, and I didn't realize at the time it was that codependency of wanting to be someone's savior, rescuing all of that stuff.
Mhm.
And so it really helped me see that in order to attract the partner I actually wanted, I had to be the partner to myself.
Yes. And we can't throw love at anything if we haven't filled up ourselves.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Full vessel.
yes. Good.
Oh, well, I have absolutely loved this conversation. Is there anything else that you would like to give the listeners before we leave?
Well, I think we've really pretty much covered it.
Yeah.
Um, but there is a field out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing. Uh, and I'll meet you there.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here with me. Thank you for everyone who is listening to this. Know that if you are here, it's because you're meant to be. Thank you.
Thank you.
Make sure to follow the links that accompany this episode. You will learn a lot more about today's guest and see what they have going on now. You will also get all the links to follow them on their journeys if this seed resonates with you. Come back next week for another Seed of Wisdom. If you loved what you saw or listened to, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.